Are you my dad? The question lands before the room even realizes it has been asked, and Ethan Caldwell, a man who has closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, stops mid-step as if time itself has stalled around him. His hand still hovering near a glass he no longer remembers picking up, the low hum of conversation fading into a distant blur while every camera in the ballroom continues flashing, capturing a moment no one understands yet. Because Ethan is not looking at the crowd, not at the press, not even at the stage prepared for him. He is staring at the girl, at Zoe, standing there in a simple dress that does not belong in a room filled with tailored suits and polished shoes, her posture steady, her gaze unshaken, as if she has rehearsed this moment her entire life. And for a second that feels longer than any deal he has ever negotiated, Ethan does nothing, says nothing, because something about her presence is already breaking the version of reality he trusts. Then his eyes drop, not by choice but by instinct, drawn to her hand, to the thin bracelet wrapped loosely around her wrist, worn, slightly faded, nothing expensive, nothing remarkable to anyone else in the room. But to him it hits like a memory he buried years ago, a memory he told himself no longer mattered. His breath shifts, shallow at first, then uneven, and for the first time tonight the cameras do not matter, the investors do not matter. The speech he was about to give disappears completely, because that bracelet should not exist here, not in this moment, not on her wrist, and yet there it is, undeniable, pulling him backward into fragments he cannot fully piece together. A late summer evening, a promise he never followed through on, a name he has not said out loud in over a decade. And the more he tries to stay present, the more those fragments push forward, cracking through the calm exterior he has spent years perfecting. Someone nearby laughs nervously, someone whispers, a phone rises higher to capture a better angle. But Zoe does not move. She does not fill the silence. She simply watches him, waiting, as if she already knows that every second he delays is an answer in itself. And Ethan realizes something else, something far more unsettling than the bracelet, that she is not guessing, she is not hoping, she is certain, and that certainty presses against him harder than any question ever could, forcing him to step closer even when every instinct tells him to walk away, to dismiss this, to control the narrative like he always does. But he cannot, because control requires clarity, and right now clarity is the one thing slipping out of reach. So he lowers himself slightly, just enough to meet her at eye level, the room holding its breath without knowing why. And with a voice that no longer carries the authority everyone expects, he asks the only question he can form, the one question that might anchor him back to something real. Where did you get that? And the moment her lips begin to move, before a single word is heard, something inside him already knows that whatever she is about to say will change everything. Zoe does not answer right away, and that silence stretches longer than it should, long enough for the entire room to lean closer without realizing it, long enough for Ethan to feel the weight of every second pressing against his chest. And when she finally speaks, her voice is calm, almost too calm for a child her age, as if she has practiced saying these words more than once. She says, "My mom gave it to me, and she told me to never take it off, not even when I sleep, not even when I shower, because it belongs to someone who would recognize it." And Ethan feels something tighten in his chest at the precision of that sentence, not just what she said, but how she said it, like a message delivered exactly as it was meant to be heard. And before he can stop himself, he asks, "What is your mother's name?" But Zoe tilts her head slightly and studies him instead of answering, as if she is deciding whether he deserves that information yet. And around them the atmosphere has shifted completely. Conversations have stopped. The soft music that once filled the room now feels distant and out of place. Phones are raised higher, capturing every second, every micro-expression, every flicker of uncertainty crossing Ethan's face, a face that has built an empire on certainty. And one of his assistants takes a cautious step forward, whispering his name under her breath, trying to remind him of the schedule, of the speech, of the hundreds of people waiting for him to take control of the night. But he does not respond. He does not even hear her, because his focus has narrowed to a single detail, the bracelet, the way it sits slightly loose on Zoe's wrist, the small engraving near the clasp that no one else in the room would notice unless they knew exactly where to look. And without thinking he reaches out but stops just short of touching it. as if crossing that final inch would make something irreversible, and his mind begins filling in gaps he has avoided for years, late nights, a decision made too quickly, a promise left unfinished, and the more he tries to dismiss it, the more the details align in ways he cannot explain away. And then Zoe finally speaks again, not answering his question, but asking one of her own. Why did you stop looking? And the words hit harder than anything she has said so far, because he never told anyone that he had looked at all, not publicly, not privately, not even to himself in a way he would admit. And for the first time, his composure fractures just enough for it to be visible. His posture shifts, his eyes flicker away for a split second before returning to her, and the room feels smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves are closing in on a truth that refuses to stay hidden. And he realizes something else that unsettles him even more than the question. She is not here by accident. She did not wander into this room by chance. She found him. She chose this moment, this place, this audience. And that means someone told her exactly where he would be, which means someone else has been watching from a distance for longer than he ever imagined. And as that realization settles in, heavy and undeniable, Ethan understands that whatever happens next will not just stay between him and this girl. It will unfold in front of everyone. And there will be no way to control how the story is told once it begins. The question does not leave Ethan any room to hide, and for a moment, he considers giving a simple answer, something controlled, something safe. But nothing comes out because the truth behind her words is already louder than anything he could say. And Zoe watches him closely, as if she can measure the distance between what he wants to say and what he actually will. And then she slowly lifts her wrist just enough for him to see the bracelet clearly, not offering it, not forcing it, just letting it exist between them like evidence that does not need explanation. And this time Ethan cannot stop himself as he leans in slightly closer, his eyes narrowing to the tiny engraving he once memorized without thinking it would ever matter again. A set of initials carved with uneven pressure, not by a machine, but by hand. And the moment he sees them, his breath catches, because it is not just familiar, it is exact, down to the smallest imperfection. And suddenly the fragments in his mind stop being fragments and begin to form something complete, something he can no longer dismiss as coincidence. And he hears his own voice from years ago echoing in a memory he tried to bury, promising something he did not stay long enough to fulfill. And that memory does not feel distant anymore. It feels immediate, like it has been waiting for this exact moment to return. And around them the tension thickens as whispers ripple through the crowd, people speculating, guessing, trying to connect dots they do not fully understand. And one of the investors near the front quietly steps back as if sensing that whatever is unfolding is no longer part of a business event, but something far more personal, far more unpredictable. And Ethan straightens slightly, but not fully, caught between the instinct to regain control and the pull of a truth that is beginning to surface whether he is ready or not. And he asks again, but this time his voice is lower, steadier, more careful. What is your mother's name? And Zoe finally answers. Not quickly, not dramatically, just clearly, like she has nothing to hide. She says her name is Lila Carter, and the name lands with a weight that is impossible to ignore, because it does not just sound familiar. It connects directly to a part of Ethan's life he sealed off completely, a time before the headlines, before the empire, when decisions were made without thinking about consequences that could stretch this far into the future. And for a brief second, he closes his eyes, not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for the memory to sharpen, for the timeline to align in a way that leaves no comfortable alternative explanation. And when he opens them again, Zoe is still there, still waiting, not demanding, not accusing, just present in a way that forces him to acknowledge her. And that presence alone begins to shift something inside him. Because for the first time he realizes this is not just about a question or a bracelet or even the past. It is about what he chooses to do now, in front of everyone, with no script and no way to rewrite the moment once it passes. And just as he starts to speak, just as the first word forms, a voice from behind the crowd calls out a name that freezes him even more than before, because it is not his name, it is hers. And it changes everything again. Before he can answer, the voice cuts through the room with a clarity that silences every whisper, and it calls out Zoe's name again, louder this time, carrying a mix of urgency and something else that Ethan cannot immediately define, and both of them turn toward the sound at the same moment. Their attention pulled to the edge of the crowd where a woman stands partially out of breath, as if she moved faster than she should have, her presence instantly shifting the energy in the room without a single dramatic gesture. And Ethan does not need an introduction because he recognizes her before she even steps fully into the light, not just by her face, but by the way she carries herself, the same quiet strength he remembers, unchanged in a way that makes the years between feel shorter and heavier at the same time. And Lila Carter steps forward slowly, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving with a certainty that contrasts everything Ethan is feeling. And as she gets closer, the crowd instinctively parts, creating a path without being asked, because something about the moment makes it clear this is not something to interrupt. And Zoe glances up at her briefly, not surprised, not confused, just acknowledging her presence like this was always part of the plan. And that realization lands harder on Ethan than anything else so far, because it confirms that none of this is accidental, that every step has been chosen, every second timed, and he finds himself standing again without remembering when he decided to move, his posture shifting as he faces Lila directly for the first time in years. And for a brief moment neither of them speaks, not because there is nothing to say, but because there is too much, too many unfinished sentences hanging between them, too many questions that have waited too long to be asked. And when Lila finally does speak, her voice is steady but not distant. She says, "You asked where she got it." And Ethan feels the weight of that sentence immediately because it is not just an answer, it is a reminder, and he nods slightly without realizing it, inviting her to continue even though part of him is not ready to hear what comes next. And she continues without raising her voice, without needing to. She says, "I kept it safe until she was old enough to understand why it mattered, and then I gave it to her with one instruction: find him when you are ready." And the words settle into the room with a quiet finality that no one can ignore, and Ethan's mind moves quickly, trying to measure time, trying to calculate what he missed, what he chose not to see. And he looks at Zoe again, really looks this time, not just at the bracelet or the question, but at her, at the details he did not allow himself to notice before. The way she stands, the way she holds eye contact without fear, the way her presence alone has shifted everything around him. And something inside him begins to change, not fully, not all at once, but enough that he can no longer treat this as a situation to manage, and the room feels like it is waiting for him to respond, for him to take control again, to say something that will define what this moment becomes. But for the first time, he understands that whatever he says will not just shape the narrative for others, it will shape what happens between him and the two people standing in front of him. And as that realization settles in, heavier than any decision he has made in years, he opens his mouth to speak, knowing that this time there is no version of the truth he can hide behind the words he has rehearsed his entire life refuse to come out. And Ethan feels the rare sensation of standing without a script as the room waits for him to define what this moment means. But the truth pressing against him does not fit into anything controlled or polished, and instead of speaking, immediately he exhales slowly, as if buying himself a second he does not actually have. And when he finally looks at Lila again, there is no distance left in his expression, only recognition and something deeper that he cannot mask. And he says, "Your timing is not a coincidence." And Lila meets his gaze without hesitation and answers, "No, it is not, because this was never about catching you off guard. It was about making sure you would finally listen." And that sentence lands with a clarity that cuts through every distraction still lingering in the room. And Ethan nods once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement that she is right, that he has spent years not listening, not asking, not returning to a moment that deserved more than silence. And Zoe stands between them quietly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, simply holding her place as if she understands that this conversation is unfolding exactly the way it needs to. And Ethan turns his attention to her again, this time without the barrier he tried to keep earlier. And he studies her face not for proof, but for understanding. And the more he looks, the harder it becomes to ignore what is right in front of him, the alignment of time, the bracelet, the certainty in her voice. And he realizes that the question she asked at the beginning was not meant to confuse him. It It was meant to force him into this exact position where he has to answer honestly. And that realization removes the last excuse he might have had to avoid what comes next, and he finally speaks again, this time slower, more deliberate, as if each word matters more than any decision he has made before. He says, "I did not know," and the room reacts subtly, not with noise but with a shift in attention, because those 4 words carry more weight than any denial or explanation could have. And Lila watches him carefully before responding, not dismissing him, not challenging him, just stating what she knows. She says, "Maybe you did not know then, but you chose not to look long enough to find out." And Ethan does not argue because he cannot, because the truth in her statement is undeniable. And Zoe looks between them, absorbing every word, not confused, not overwhelmed, just listening in a way that feels older than her years. And Ethan takes another breath, deeper this time, grounding himself in a reality he can no longer step away from. And he lowers himself slightly again so that he is at Zoe's level, not out of performance, but because it feels like the only honest position left. And he looks at her directly, without distraction, without the room, without the cameras. And in that moment, everything else fades just enough for him to say the one thing he has avoided since she first spoke. But before the answer fully leaves his mouth, Zoe lifts the bracelet slightly and says, "There is one more thing you have not seen yet." And that stops him again, not with confusion this time, but with a growing awareness that whatever she is about to reveal will not just confirm the past. It will change what happens next. Zoe turns her wrist slowly, not rushing the motion, letting the small detail reveal itself at a pace that feels intentional. And Ethan leans in closer without realizing how much the space between them has already closed, his focus narrowing again to the bracelet, but this time not just the outer engraving he recognized before, because on the inside, barely visible unless the light hits it at the right angle, there is a second line of text, smaller, more precise, something that was not there when he last saw it. And for a moment, he thinks his memory might be failing him, that perhaps he overlooked it all those years ago. But as the light catches it fully, he knows that is not the case. This was added later, carefully, deliberately, and his breath slows as he reads it, not out loud, not for anyone else, just for himself. And the meaning lands instantly, not because of the words alone, but because of what they imply, a timeline that extends far beyond the moment he walked away, a connection that did not end when he thought it did. And Zoe watches his reaction closely, not with impatience, but with quiet confidence, as if she already knows exactly what he is seeing and exactly how it will affect him. And around them the crowd has grown even more silent, the earlier whispers replaced by a focused stillness as people sense that something significant is unfolding even if they cannot see the detail themselves. And Ethan straightens slightly, but does not step back, because stepping back would mean denying what he now understands. And he looks at Lila again, searching for confirmation he no longer needs but still wants. And she gives a small nod, not dramatic, not emotional, just enough to tell him that what he read is real, that there is no misunderstanding left to hide behind. And that nod shifts something final inside him, something that had been resisting up until now, because the question is no longer about possibility, it is about acceptance. And he turns back to Zoe with a different expression than before, less guarded, less controlled, more present. And he asks quietly, "When did you find out?" And Zoe answers without hesitation. She says, "I have always known what the bracelet means, but I only understood who it belonged to a few months ago." And Ethan processes that quickly, calculating backward, realizing that for her this has not been a lifetime of uncertainty, but a recent clarity, a decision to act, a choice to come here instead of staying silent. And that realization adds another layer of weight to the moment, because it means she is not here by accident or by pressure. She is here because she chose to be. And Ethan nods slowly, absorbing that. And for the first time since this began, he allows himself to consider not just the past but the future, what this means moving forward, what responsibility looks like in a moment that cannot be undone. And just as he opens his mouth again, ready to finally answer the question that started all of this, a sudden shift in the crowd pulls his attention to the side as someone steps forward holding up a phone, showing a live stream that has already begun to spread beyond the room. Thousands of viewers watching in real time. And in that instant, Ethan realizes that this is no longer a private reckoning. It has become something much larger, something that will follow every word he says next. And the weight of that realization settles in just as heavily as the truth he can no longer deny. The glow of the phone screen reflects in Ethan's eyes for a brief second before he looks away, not because he is unaware of what it means, but because he understands it too well. The moment has already escaped the room and taken on a life of its own, and for years he has managed narratives with precision, shaping perception before it could shape him. But this time there is no prepared statement, no team ready to redirect the story. And he feels the pressure of that realization settle into something heavier than reputation, something personal that cannot be rewritten once spoken. And he takes a slow breath, steadying himself not for the audience, but for the two people standing in front of him. And when he looks back at Zoe, the distraction of the crowd fades just enough for him to focus again. And he notices something he missed before, not in the bracelet, not in the words she has said, but in the way she stands, grounded, patient, as if she has already accepted whatever answer comes next. And that quiet strength shifts his perspective in a way he cannot ignore, because it removes the last illusion that this is about him controlling the outcome. And instead it becomes about whether he will meet the moment honestly or continue avoiding it. And he glances briefly at Lila, who remains calm, not stepping in, not interrupting, allowing him the space to respond. And that silence from her carries its own message, that this decision belongs to him now. And Ethan nods slightly, more to himself than to either of them, acknowledging that there is no version of this where he walks away unchanged. And he lowers himself again to Zoe's level, this time without hesitation, and his voice, when he finally speaks, carries a different tone, not the authority that built his empire, but something quieter, more real. He says, "I see it now." And the words are simple, but they carry everything he has been processing. And Zoe watches him closely, searching for more, and he continues, slower, choosing each word carefully. "I see what I should have seen a long time ago." And there is no reaction from the crowd this time. No whisper, no movement, because even they can sense that something has shifted beyond spectacle, and Ethan feels that shift fully as he allows himself to say what he has avoided since the moment she first spoke. He says, "I believe you." And those three words land with a weight that feels final and beginning at the same time, because belief is not proof, but it is the first step he has been unwilling to take until now. And Zoe's expression does not change dramatically, but there is a subtle release in her posture, as if something she has been holding onto has finally been acknowledged. And Ethan notices it immediately, realizing that this moment is not just about confirming a past connection. It is about what comes after that confirmation. And for the first time since this began, he allows himself to consider what responsibility looks like beyond a single answer, beyond a single moment. And just as that thought settles in, one of the screens in the room flickers as the live stream expands to a larger display, pulling more attention, more eyes, more expectation into the space. And Ethan understands that whatever he says next will not just define this moment, it will define everything that follows. And the weight of that realization presses in as he prepares to take the next step, knowing there is no way back to who he was before she walked into the room. The large screen behind the stage now mirrors the live stream in real time, and Ethan can see himself from a distance, kneeling slightly, speaking to a girl who has quietly reshaped the entire room. And for a brief second, the image feels unreal, like he is watching someone else step into a moment he never planned for. But the weight in his chest brings him back immediately, grounding him in the reality that this is happening and there is no separation between him and what the world is now seeing. And he slowly stands, not to regain authority, but because he understands that what comes next cannot stay contained in a private exchange. And as he rises, the crowd instinctively adjusts, giving him space, but also watching more closely than before, their attention sharpened by the growing awareness that this is no longer just a question of identity, but a turning point. And Ethan glances once more at Zoe, before turning slightly toward the room, not fully breaking the connection but acknowledging the presence of everyone else. And when he speaks, his voice carries clearly, not louder than necessary, but steady enough to reach beyond the immediate circle. He says there are moments in life where the truth arrives without warning, and you have to decide in real time whether you will face it or step away. And he pauses briefly, not for effect, but because the weight of his own words is still settling in. And he continues, I have spent years building things that look certain from the outside, but certainty does not always mean understanding. And as he says this, his gaze returns to Zoe, anchoring his words in something real rather than abstract. And the room remains completely still, the usual sounds of movement and conversation replaced by a focused silence that feels almost intentional. And Ethan takes another breath, deeper this time, allowing himself to move forward without trying to control how it will be received. And he adds, tonight, I am choosing to face what is in front of me, even if I do not have every answer yet. And those words shift the tone of the moment again, not closing the story but opening it in a way that invites something more. And Zoe listens without interruption, her expression steady, her posture unchanged. But there is a quiet acknowledgement in the way she holds his gaze, as if she understands that this is not the final answer, but a step toward one. And Lila stands just behind her, watching carefully, not interfering, allowing the moment to unfold without pushing it in any direction. And Ethan turns back fully to Zoe now, bringing the focus back to where it began. And he says, I cannot change what I did not know then, but I can choose what I do now. And the sentence hangs in the air, unfinished in a way that suggests more is coming. And just as he is about to continue, Zoe takes a small step forward, closing the distance between them, and lifts the bracelet once more, not to show it, but to place it gently into his hand. And that simple action shifts everything again, because this time the object is not just evidence, it is a decision. And Ethan looks down at it resting in his palm, feeling the weight of it in a way he never did before. And as he looks back up to meet her eyes, he understands that whatever he says next will no longer be about the past alone. It will define what this connection becomes moving forward. Ethan feels the bracelet settle into his palm with a weight that is far greater than its size. And for a brief moment he does not move, not because he is unsure of what to do, but because he understands that this small object now carries a responsibility he can no longer avoid. And as he slowly closes his fingers around it, the sensation becomes real in a way that no memory ever was, grounding him in the present instead of the past. And when he looks back at Zoe, his expression has shifted again, not just softened but focused, as if he is finally seeing her without distraction or distance. And he takes a small step closer, closing the space that once felt impossible to cross. And he says, your mom trusted you with this. And Zoe nods once, simple and direct. And he continues then, she trusted you to find me for a reason. And the words are not a question, but a realization forming in real time. And Zoe meets his gaze without hesitation and says, she told me I would know when the time was right. And Ethan absorbs that quietly, understanding that this moment was not forced or rushed, it was chosen. And that choice carries its own meaning. And around them the room remains still. The earlier energy of curiosity replaced by something more focused, more aware that this is no longer a spectacle but a decision unfolding in front of them. And Ethan glances briefly at the large screen where the live stream continues to expand, comments and reactions moving faster than he can read. But he looks away almost immediately, choosing not to let that noise define what he does next. And he shifts his attention back to Zoe and Lila, grounding himself in what matters instead of what is being watched. And he says, I cannot undo the time that has already passed. And there is a pause, not because he is uncertain, but because he is choosing his next words carefully. And he continues, but I can decide what I do with the time that is in front of me. And that sentence lands with a quiet weight that does not need emphasis, because it speaks directly to the moment they are standing in. And Zoe watches him closely, not looking for perfection, not expecting certainty, just listening. And Ethan takes another breath before adding, I want to understand everything I missed, and I want to do that the right way, not in front of cameras, not in a way that turns this into something it should not be. And for the first time since this began, the focus shifts slightly away from the crowd and back to something more personal, more grounded. And Lila steps forward just enough to stand beside Zoe, her presence steady but not overwhelming. And she says, understanding takes more than words. And Ethan nods immediately, not defensive, not resistant, just acknowledging the truth in what she is saying. And he responds, I know, and I am ready to prove that, not just say it. And there is a subtle shift in Zoe's posture again, a small release of tension that suggests she is hearing more than just the words. She is measuring the intent behind them. And Ethan notices that, recognizing that this moment is not about convincing anyone instantly. It is about taking the first step in a direction he should have taken years ago. And as that realization settles in, he opens his hand slightly, looking down at the bracelet once more before gently holding it out toward Zoe, not returning it as if nothing has changed, but offering it back with a different meaning. And as she reaches out to take it again, their hands briefly meet. And in that brief contact, Ethan understands that this is not the end of a question, but the beginning of something far more complex. And as he looks up again, ready to speak further, a voice from across the room calls his name, sharper this time, carrying urgency that cuts through the stillness and pulls his attention in a new direction. Just as the moment begins to shift once again, the voice calling his name carries a tone that Ethan recognizes immediately, controlled but urgent, the kind that only appears when something is already moving faster than expected. And he turns slightly to see his chief of staff standing near the edge of the stage, holding a tablet angled just enough for him to catch a glimpse of what is happening beyond the room. And even from a distance, Ethan can see the scale of it, headlines forming in real time, clips already circulating. The moment he is standing and now expanding far beyond these walls. And for a brief second, the old instinct returns, the instinct to step in, to manage, to redirect, to contain what can still be contained. But it fades almost as quickly as it arrives, replaced by the clarity that this is not a situation he can control in the way he has controlled everything else. And that realization anchors him back to where he needs to be, not with the screen, not with the headlines, but with Zoe and Lila. And he makes a deliberate choice not to walk toward his staff, not to take the tablet, not to engage with the narrative forming outside. And instead, he turns fully back, closing off the distraction before it can pull him away again. And that decision does not go unnoticed, not by Zoe, not by Lila, and not by the room, because it marks a shift that is visible even without explanation. And Ethan steps slightly closer, reducing the distance even further. And his voice, when he speaks again, is quieter but more certain. He says whatever is happening out there can wait. And there is a subtle reaction in the crowd, a recognition that he is choosing something different from what they expected. And he continues, "This does not happen again. Not like this, not in front of everyone." And the meaning behind his words is clear. He is not rejecting the moment. He is protecting it, reshaping it into something that belongs to them rather than to the audience. And Zoe listens carefully. And after a brief pause, she asks, "Where do we go then?" And the question is simple, but it carries a weight that shifts the focus forward, away from what has been revealed, and toward what comes next. And Ethan considers it for a moment, not because he does not have an answer, but because he understands that whatever he says now will set the direction for everything that follows. And he glances briefly at Lila, not for permission, but for acknowledgement. And she meets his gaze with a steady calm that suggests she is willing to see what he does with this opportunity. And Ethan nods once, grounding himself in the decision he is about to make. And he says, "We start somewhere that is not this room, somewhere that allows us to talk without all of this." And he gestures slightly toward the crowd and the screens. And Zoe follows the motion with her eyes before looking back at him. And there is a moment where it seems like she is weighing the offer, not as a child being guided, but as someone making her own choice. And then she nods, small but certain, and that simple gesture shifts the energy again, because it turns intention into action. And Ethan exhales slowly, aware that this is only the beginning of a much larger conversation. And just as he prepares to take the first step toward leaving the space, the large screen behind them updates again. A new headline appearing in bold text that pulls the attention of the entire room back in an instant, forcing Ethan to confront the reality that even as he tries to step away, the story is only getting bigger. The bold headline flashes across the large screen behind them, and even without turning, Ethan can feel the shift ripple through the room as every eye lifts toward it at the same time. The scale of the moment expanding again beyond anything he can physically step away from. And for a brief second, he closes his eyes, not in frustration, but in clarity, because he understands now that there is no clean exit from what has already begun, only a choice in how he continues forward within it. And when he opens his eyes again, he does not look at the screen. He looks at Zoe, holding onto the one point that still feels grounded and real. And he says quietly, "We do not get to choose when the world starts watching, but we do get to choose what we do while it is." and the words are not meant for the audience. They are meant for her. And Zoe listens without interruption, her expression steady, absorbing not just the words but the intention behind them. And Lila shifts slightly beside her, her posture still calm, but more attentive now, as if recognizing that this moment is about to move from acknowledgement into commitment. And Ethan takes a slow breath before continuing. This is not something I will let be defined by a headline. Not for you. Not for her. And he glances briefly at Lila, including her without needing to say more. And the room remains silent, not because it is empty, but because the attention has narrowed so completely that even movement feels out of place. And Ethan continues, I cannot control what people say, but I can control what I do next. And that means we take this one step at a time, the right way. And there is a subtle firmness in his voice now, not the authority he uses in business, but a clarity that comes from finally making a decision he cannot undo. And Zoe studies him for a moment longer, and then she asks a question that is softer than before, but carries more weight. She says, does that mean you are not going to walk away? And the simplicity of it cuts through everything else, reducing the entire situation down to the one thing that matters most. And Ethan does not hesitate this time, not because the answer is easy, but because it is clear. And he says, no, I am not walking away. And the certainty in his voice settles into the space between them in a way that feels different from everything that came before, because this is not a reaction, it is a choice. And Zoe's shoulders relax slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough for Ethan to notice. Enough for him to understand that this answer matters in a way no explanation ever could. And Lila watches closely, her expression unreadable at first, but there is a quiet shift there as well, something that suggests she is listening not just to what he says, but how he says it, measuring whether this moment is real or temporary. And Ethan meets her gaze for a brief second, not seeking approval, but acknowledging the weight of her presence in all of this. And then he looks back to Zoe and adds, we are going to figure this out together. Not here, not like this, but in a way that actually means something. And the words land with a quiet finality, not closing the story, but defining its direction. And just as that direction begins to take shape, the doors at the back of the room open wider and more. People step in, drawn by the growing attention, the story continuing to expand whether they move or not. And Ethan realizes that even as they prepare to take the next step, the world is already moving faster than them. And there is no guarantee they will get the space he is promising without a new challenge rising immediately. The movement near the doors pulls a wave of attention across the room, and Ethan can feel the space tightening again as more people step inside, drawn by the momentum of something that has already grown beyond a private moment. And for a brief second, he considers whether leaving now will even create the distance he promised. But then he looks at Zoe and realizes that hesitation will only make things harder, not easier. And he takes a small step forward, not away from her, but alongside her, signaling a shift from reaction to direction. And he says quietly, we move now before this turns into something else. And Zoe nods without needing further explanation, her trust not loud but present. And Lila steps closer on the other side, forming a quiet alignment between the three of them that feels intentional even without words. And as they begin to move, the crowd instinctively parts again, not out of respect alone, but out of curiosity. Every person trying to capture one more moment, one more angle, one more piece of a story that is still unfolding. And Ethan keeps his focus forward, not engaging with the cameras, not reacting to the murmurs, because he understands that every second they remain in the center of the room adds another layer to something he is trying to simplify. And as they near the edge of the space, his chief of staff steps in again, closer this time, lowering his voice just enough to speak without drawing attention. And he says, we need to address this now before it escalates further. And Ethan pauses for a fraction of a second, not stopping but slowing just enough to respond without breaking the momentum. And he says, we will address it, but not like this. Not yet. And there is a firmness in his tone that leaves no room for negotiation, and the staff member nods reluctantly, stepping back, but staying close enough to follow. And as they continue moving, the large screen behind them updates again. New images, new commentary, the narrative building faster than any controlled response could catch up to. And Ethan feels the weight of that without turning around, choosing instead to keep his attention on what is directly in front of him. because he knows that if he looks back now it will pull him into something he cannot fully manage. And when they reach the hallway just beyond the main room, the noise shifts instantly, the intensity of the crowd replaced by a quieter but still charged atmosphere. And Ethan exhales slightly, not in relief, but in recognition that this is only a temporary step away, not a resolution. And he turns to Zoe and Lila, the space between them now free of cameras and immediate pressure. And for the first time since this began, there is a moment that feels almost still, and Ethan uses that moment carefully, saying this is where we start, not with answers, but with honesty. And Zoe watches him closely, her expression searching but not doubtful, and Lila stands steady, her presence grounding the moment without needing to direct it. And Ethan continues, I am going to listen first, all of it, without interruption, without assumptions, and then we decide together what comes next. And the words shift the tone again, not ending the tension, but redirecting it into something more controlled, more intentional. And Zoe takes a small breath before speaking, ready to begin telling the part of the story that has not yet been heard. And just as she opens her mouth, the sound of footsteps approaches quickly from behind, reminding them that even here, even now, the outside world is still closing in, and whatever they are about to say next may not stay between them for long. The approaching footsteps grow louder against the quiet of the hallway, and Ethan turns slightly, expecting another interruption, another attempt to pull him back into the storm he just stepped away from. But instead it is a security staff member who slows as he reaches them, lowering his voice to a respectful tone while still carrying urgency, saying the press is moving toward this side of the building and it will not be long before they find this corridor. And Ethan listens without reacting immediately, because the information does not surprise him. It only confirms what he already understood, that time is limited and every decision now has to be intentional. And he nods once, acknowledging the update before shifting his attention back to Zoe and Lila, refusing to let the outside pressure dictate the moment. And he says quietly, we do not have much time, but we have enough to begin. And there is a steadiness in his voice that was not there at the start of the night, something more grounded, more certain. And Zoe looks at him, measuring that change, and then she begins to speak, not rushing, not dramatic, just clear. She says, my mom never told me your name at first. She only told me that the person who gave her this bracelet made a promise he could not keep yet. And Ethan feels that sentence settle deeply, not as an accusation, but as a truth he cannot deny. And Zoe continues, she said people can change, but only if they choose to. And she told me that if I ever found you, I should not ask for anything. I should only ask one question. And Ethan understands immediately what that question was, what it has already done, and he nods slowly, signaling for her to go on. And she adds, I did not come here for an answer everyone else could hear. I came here to see if you would listen when it mattered. And the simplicity of that statement shifts everything again, because it reframes the entire moment, not as a reveal, not as a confrontation, but as a test of something much deeper. And Ethan absorbs that quietly, recognizing that what he does next is not about proving anything to the world, but about responding to the trust placed in this moment. And Lila watches from the side, her expression steady but softer now, as if she is seeing the direction this is taking and allowing it to unfold without interruption. And Ethan takes a breath, steady and deliberate, and he says, I am listening now, and I will keep listening after this moment ends, not just tonight, but from here on. And the words carry a commitment that feels different from anything he has said before, because they are not tied to a single decision, but to a continuation. And Zoe studies him for a second longer before giving a small nod, accepting not perfection but intention. And as that quiet exchange settles between them, the noise from the far end of the hallway begins to rise again, voices getting closer, cameras likely not far behind. And Ethan realizes that this is the edge of the moment they can control, the last second before everything opens back up to the outside world. And he looks at Zoe and Lila one more time and says, we continue this somewhere they cannot interrupt. And this time there is no hesitation, no pause, just a shared understanding as they begin to move together down the hallway, leaving behind the noise that is already catching up to them, carrying forward a story that has only just begun, one that will not be defined by how it started, but by what they choose to do next.